So we're now in Lecture 1, Part 3, the economy, accumulation, and production of inequality. So how do we measure the economy? We use gross domestic product. That's a fairly common method. You can talk about gross domestic product of the state of California, or of the US, or of Great Britain, or of the EU. But it's gross domestic product, generally speaking, of one country or one state within our country. And that's the goods and services that are produced in that state or country. Gross national income includes income from foreign. In other words, if there's profit flows from investments overseas, like the global economy of the US, we have corporate headquarters in various parts of the world. There's income that flows into American corporations from all over the globe. That's all part of gross national income. Purchasing power parity is per capita. And what this really means in the simplest terms, it's what you can buy for your money. Now, what it costs to live in the US is considerably different, or say California, from actually the Midwest part of the country. The cost of housing, the cost of food, the cost of gasoline, utilities, everything. Purchasing power. What is your purchasing power? What does a dollar buy? What a dollar buys in Little Rock, Arkansas is considerably more. Takes about $2 to $3 in California to buy what $1 buys in Little Rock, Arkansas. So you need to, that's an important factor. It's a corrective measure. It kind of balances it out. You may have less income someplace, but the purchasing power may be greater, even with that less income. Now, global north and global south, what do we mean by that? Well, if you take the world down here and you divide it kind of right here on the equator, there are a few areas up above here that are green, and there are a few areas down here that are dark green. But for the most part, if you're above the equator, you're fairly well off. If you're below the equator, you're in the southern hemisphere, you're fairly poor. The global north and south have to do with wealth distribution and wealth inequality. Now, when we talk about HDI, that's Human Development Index, and the Human Development Index is based on life expectancy, educational attainment, and personal income. And it's a more in-depth look at how regions are impacted than just talking about income. Territory and politics. So when we talk about sovereign states and we talk about nations, nation states, failed states, you hear a lot of news now about failed states in the Middle East in particular. Nation states, those are relatively new phenomena. I mean, 19th century. There's some talk about globalization and neoliberalism eliminating nation states. Failed states, plenty of those around. Supranational organizations, those are things like the WTO, NAFTA, European Union, NATO, United Nations. The thing about supranational organizations that I want you to kind of keep in mind is that supranational organizations, generally speaking, are not elected. And what that means is you and I don't vote for them. The United States has many supranational organizations that we belong to that you and I don't really have a say about who is on those and who represents us and what they represent for us. So those are big organizations with lots of global power that may or may not represent the will of the people. NGOs or non-governmental organizations. That's everything from the Red Cross to just about every type of organization you can imagine. And it could be local, or it could be an INGO, which is an international non-governmental organization. All of those, there's just thousands and thousands and thousands of those. Culture and populations, very important when we're looking at regions. Culture, shared set of meanings and practices. Doesn't mean they have to agree with what we want. Doesn't mean that they have to believe what we believe. Shared meanings, how they see the world. The picture here looks like she's an Inca lady, maybe somewhere in Peru or Ecuador, but a different culture than, say, in Brazil. Demographics. Demographics are very important. Population densities, population movements. When we talk about migration, we're talking about population movements. The other thing about demographics that are important is the population growing or falling? Is it aging or is it younger? That says a lot about its future. Geographies of religion. The diffusion, the global distribution, the spread of religious fundamentalism. It's said that by 2050, Italy will not be a Catholic country. It will be a Muslim country. It's said that Europe, much of Southern Europe at least, may very well be Muslim, be the dominant religion, because the population in those countries are dropping. Native-born Italians, ethnic Italians, they're going to be less than 50% of the population in Italy by 2050. Europe has a very extreme birth rate problem. Women are having less than 2 children. The United States is unique, and that's a thing that we call American exceptionalism. We're an industrialized country with a growing population, the only highly industrialized country with a growing population in the world. Geographies of language, so the global distribution of language, the dialects, the lingua franca, in other words, what language is commonly used for business and government. I think in our global sense, because America speaks English, English is the lingua franca used in commerce and airline industry and much of other industries. It's not the most commonly spoken language on the planet, but it's definitely the dominant language. Cultural practices, social differences, and identity. Ethnicity. So community identity. Ethnicity is not something that is strictly in one part of any country. Ethnicity can be how we see ourselves. What community do we see ourselves belonging to? Race, very problematic because there's really no clear genetic difference in race. There's some features about people that we use to define race, and that may be skin color, it may be hair type, it may be the color of your eyes, but it's very problematic. Gender, socially learned, and differences between men and women. So gender's a lot in the news. It's transgender community. There's a lot of talk about what is gender. A few years ago, we did a study at UC Davis of graduate students. There was 5,600 graduate students, and about 4,800 responded to the survey, and we got 65 different definitions of gender. So gender is very plastic, it's very malleable, and it is something that is defined by the individual, which is different necessarily maybe than sex, but it is different. Class is based on wealth and access to resources. There's a Marxist view of class, the proletariat, revolution. We'll go into class a little bit.